When Casey returned home, his girlfriend's car was parked in the driveway. Her belongings were in the bedroom, and her beloved dog was running around the house, barking. But Rebecca herself was nowhere to be found. Where could the young student, who had come home for the weekend, have disappeared to? Could her beloved boyfriend have been involved? What could have happened in the house between the couple? What caused her to vanish forever? Or was everything not as it seemed at first glance? Friends, please support these videos with your activity. Subscribe to the channel, put a like on this video, and write a comment when you watch the video. Your activity is very valuable. Thank you. Rebecca Gould was born on April 28, 1982, in the small American town of Melbourne, Arkansas. She had 3 sisters, but shortly after the youngest was born, their parents divorced. The girls stayed with their mother, but continued to see their father. At first, they struggled with their parents' separation, but ultimately, it brought them closer together. After graduating high school, Rebecca enrolled in Northwest Arkansas Community College and moved to Fayetteville. One of her sisters was already studying at the same college, so they had the chance to see each other nearly every day. Although their home was only 40 kilometers from the college, the students sometimes found it hard to make time between classes. Still, the sisters always found a way to visit their family. In September 2004, when Rebecca was 22, she was looking forward to the start of a new semester at her college. For some time, she had been considering transferring to the University of Arkansas, and soon an opportunity arose. However, before moving, Rebecca planned to complete one more semester. Before the start of classes, on Sunday, September 19th, the sisters went home for the weekend to visit their loved ones. Rebecca's boyfriend lived in a nearby town, so she wanted to spend time with her family and then with him. The next day, she was supposed to pick up her sister and return to college together, as they had driven in Rebecca's car. However, at the appointed time, the student didn't show up. Her sister tried calling her several times but got no response. The Gould family wasn't too worried at first. Rebecca was grown enough, and if she was delayed, there must have been a reason. But by evening, when the girl still hadn't appeared, her family began to worry. They held on to the hope that Rebecca had simply decided to stay in town for another day and would return home tomorrow. But the next day, their concern reached its peak. Rebecca still hadn't shown up, hadn't contacted any relatives, and none of her friends had seen her. That's when her mother decided to contact the police, as such behavior was out of character for her daughter. The police tracked down Rebecca's boyfriend, Casey, and learned that she had stayed at his place the previous evening. Around 8:30 a.m., she dropped him off at the cafe where he worked and planned to return to his house to collect her things and her dog. Casey added that Rebecca had promised to pick him up from work that evening, but never showed up. He waited for her in the parking lot to no avail, then called his friends and went to a party with them. The police listened to Casey's story and asked permission to search his home. The first thing they noticed was Rebecca's car, still parked outside the house. Inside, the officers found her dog and her purse with her ID. Casey also mentioned that Gould had a small suitcase with clothes, but it was nowhere to be found in the house. The situation was starting to seem unnatural. No one had seen Rebecca all day, yet her purse, car, and beloved pet were still at Casey's. There were other oddities as well. One of the officers noticed that the bed had no linens, and the mattress was misaligned. Lifting it, the police found large red stains that resembled blood. Then the officers searched the house more thoroughly and found several more brownish stains on the floor and walls. In the washing machine, they found crumpled bed linens with red streaks, and under the bathtub, there were several bottles of bleach, which is sometimes used to destroy evidence. All of this looked suspicious and suggested that Rebecca Gould might no longer be alive. The investigators couldn't yet say with certainty whether the blood belonged to the missing girl, as DNA analysis took several days. While a team of forensic experts worked in the house, detectives began questioning Rebecca's boyfriend. He could have been the last person to see Gould before her disappearance, and a significant amount of blood was found in his home. Casey claimed he had nothing to do with the girl's disappearance. According to him, The last time he saw her was that morning before work, and she hadn't been in touch since. He mentioned that after spending the night with friends, he stopped by the house to change before his next shift, but insisted he hadn't noticed any blood splatter on the floor or walls or smelled any bleach. Casey also didn't think much of Rebecca's car parked outside or her belongings left in the room. The police weren't quick to take the young man's word, but at that point, they had no substantial evidence to suspect him of foul play. The officers decided to question all of Casey's friends he had spent Tuesday night with. The guys confirmed that he was indeed with them the entire time until morning. Since Casey had an alibi, the detectives continued searching for other leads. The police still had no idea what had happened to Rebecca or when exactly she had disappeared. All they knew was that she stopped communicating on Monday morning. Soon, the detectives got another lead. Reconstructing the timeline of events on the day of Gould's disappearance, they learned that she had stopped at a gas station near Casey's workplace, bought a sandwich for breakfast and coffee, and headed to his house. The store employees recognized her from a photo and confirmed that the student had come in after 8:30 a.m., which matched Casey's story. Later, the detectives found the same sandwich untouched in his house. This suggested that Gould had returned to her boyfriend's house, and something happened to her shortly after. Given that Casey was at work at the time, as confirmed by other employees, it was unlikely that he had anything to do with his girlfriend's death. Soon, the police received the results of the blood analysis from Casey's house. It was indeed Rebecca's blood. The experts found no traces of foreign DNA. The detectives continued their efforts to solve the crime, interviewing all of the missing girl's relatives and friends. They believed that if Rebecca had been attacked, it could have been someone close to her with a personal motive. However, their conversations with her loved ones yielded no results. On September 27, 2004, a week after her disappearance, Rebecca Gould's body was found on a highway in Izard County, about 19 kilometers from her boyfriend Casey's house. It was lying at the base of an embankment. To a passing driver, it was barely visible from the road. Whoever left the girl's body there didn't even try to hide or bury it. Apparently, the perpetrator simply pulled over to the side of the road and discarded Rebecca like unwanted trash in a ditch near the highway. After the autopsy, the coroner concluded that the victim had received multiple blows to the head with a heavy object. The cause of death was strangulation, and there were no defensive wounds on the body. It seemed the attacker caught the girl off guard, and she didn't even have time to realize what was happening. The experts also found no signs that Gould had been assaulted. The body had been exposed to the elements for about a week. The exact time of death couldn't be determined. However, the detectives identified a possible murder weapon used by the perpetrator. In Casey's house, there was a piano missing one of its legs. Experts confirmed that the victim's head injuries matched the shape of the piano leg. The homeowner explained that comprehending the gravity of the situation. The police were unable to find the suspected murder weapon, either in the house or near the location where the body was discovered. Now, they had to determine the motive. The investigators immediately ruled out the possibility of a failed robbery. Nothing was missing from the house except the piano leg and Rebecca's suitcase. A motive of a sexual nature was also dismissed. That left a personal motive. The perpetrator likely knew the girl's schedule and was aware that her boyfriend would be at work that morning. It was unlikely that he had been stalking her and waiting for the right moment to strike. It was also highly probable that Rebecca knew the perpetrator. Since there were no signs of a break-in, she might have let him inside herself. After the attack, the assailant spent several hours in the house, attempting to clean bloodstains with bleach. Then he carried the body out and loaded it into a vehicle to dispose of it along the way. Despite all this, the police had no physical evidence, and the investigation stalled. Detectives considered the possible involvement of hundreds of people, including acquaintances and relatives of both Rebecca and Casey. They checked neighbors and even residents of nearby towns. The police received numerous tips, but none proved useful. In most cases, locals simply voiced suspicions about others without backing them up with any real facts. Ultimately, Rebecca Gould's case went cold. Over the following years, the investigation was reopened several times and handed off to new teams of detectives, but no progress was made. The problem lay not only in the complete lack of evidence, but also in the inability to understand the perpetrator's motives. Eventually, the mysterious nature of this strange case caught the attention of the true crime community. The murder of Rebecca Gould became the subject of various TV shows and podcasts where people tried to uncover the truth. One such person was a journalist named George Jared, who had followed the case from the beginning. Jared even wrote a book about it and launched his own podcast. For many years, he tried to find out who took Rebecca's life. One day, George Jared met Jennifer Buchholz, a former police investigator from Colorado who was also interested in the case. They joined forces and created a social media group where they shared their thoughts on the investigation, discussed them with followers, and built hypotheses. After a few months of running the blog, George and Jennifer started noticing one subscriber named William Miller. His interest in the old unsolved case was, to put it mildly, surprising. First, Miller lived in the Philippines, and his intense interest in a crime in a small American town on the other side of the world seemed unnatural. He was also one of the most active subscribers, leaving numerous comments and constantly reaching out to the group's administrators through private messages. He wanted to help solve the crime, shared his thoughts on some controversial and unclear points, and proposed his own theories. Moreover, Miller demonstrated a high level of familiarity not only with specific details of the case, but also with the local area where it happened. So, George and Jennifer found the subscriber's behavior too suspicious, but kept quiet, fearing they might scare him off. The blog's authors wanted to extract as much information as possible from this person, but tried to do so discreetly. They were fortunate that one of the group's members was a genealogy expert. After conducting a simple analysis of his background, she uncovered a surprising fact. William Miller turned out to be Casey's cousin, Rebecca's boyfriend. After this discovery, George and Jennifer decided to contact the detectives working on the Gould case and share their concerns about his activities. The police reviewed the case files and realized that Miller's name had come up from the very beginning. It turned out that the young man had visited the town around the time the attack occurred. In 2004, Miller had already been questioned and stated that he had come from Texas to help a relative. He mentioned that he had visited his cousin twice before Rebecca's disappearance. The second time, Miller didn't even enter the house and just talked to Casey outside. In 2004, Miller didn't raise any suspicions, but now the detectives took a keen interest in him. Digging deeper, they learned that William had been a suspect in several cases. In 2002, he faced charges for assaulting a minor girl and later for attacking his ex-wife. He had broken into her house and attacked her with his fists. However, in neither of these cases was Miller punished. Later, the man moved to the Philippines, got married, had children, and started working on offshore oil rigs. The investigators wanted to speak with Miller again to ask questions regarding the attack on Rebecca Gould. But since he was on the other side of the world, it was nearly impossible to do so. They also couldn't contact him, so they had to wait until he returned to the U.S. This happened only in 2020. Customs officials informed the detectives that Miller had returned to Oregon, where his mother lived. They knew William was in town, but when the investigators called his mother, she claimed she hadn't seen her son in a long time. Realizing the mother was lying, the detectives traveled to Oregon to speak with her son in person. Since there was no solid evidence against Miller, the police needed to get a confession from him at all costs, and the detectives decided to play a sort of game with him. One of the officers leading the investigation began the questioning casually. He stated that they were simply re-interviewing everyone involved in Rebecca Gould's case. Miller responded that he was ready to cooperate because he had nothing to hide. Then, as if in passing, the officer asked if William would mind taking a polygraph test when he returned to Arkansas. Miller agreed without hesitation. The detective pretended to call the local police chief to ask if there were any polygraph specialists in town. Miller, overhearing the conversation about the lie detector, noticeably grew nervous and tried to change the subject. He didn't yet know that a specialist was already waiting for him in the next room. Although polygraphs are a controversial tool and their results are not admissible in court, the police had other goals. Any unexpected turn of events could catch a suspect off guard and ultimately lead to a confession. Miller continued to act nervous, but agreed to the test, understanding how suspicious a refusal would look. He asked whether the polygraph results were admissible in court but didn't receive a clear answer. The detective vaguely explained that there were special circumstances but didn't specify what they were. As expected, William failed the test. The polygraph examiner concluded that the man had lied on all key questions, including his involvement in Rebecca's murder. The detectives kept pressing and told Miller that experts had reanalyzed all the available evidence and found Rebecca's DNA in samples taken from his car. In reality, the police had searched Miller's car back in 2004, but found nothing, and no samples were taken for further analysis. The investigator deliberately misled the suspect. By law, the police were allowed to use such tactics during questioning to elicit a confession. Sometimes, criminals did confess under the weight of non-existent irrefutable evidence. In this case, it was the detective's only hope. Fortunately, it worked. Upon hearing about Rebecca's DNA in his car, Miller fell silent and then began to talk. According to the suspect, he didn't harm Rebecca, but merely stumbled upon her lifeless body. That morning, he went to his cousin Casey's house and found an unknown man in a mask standing over the girl's bloodied body. Of course, the detectives didn't believe this story and insisted that William tell the truth. Finally, Miller abruptly interrupted the officer and said he sincerely regretted what he had done 16 years ago. On the morning of September 20th, 2004, William went hunting in the woods near Casey's house. For some unknown reason, he wanted to talk to his cousin's girlfriend, whom he had seen the day before. Miller knew Casey had already left for work, so he boldly knocked on the door and told Rebecca he needed to make a phone call. Gould let him in, and William pretended to dial a number. Meanwhile, Rebecca returned to the bedroom so as not to disturb his conversation. At that moment, an uncontrollable rage and desire to kill the girl overcame Miller. He broke off a piano leg, which was barely attached, and strode decisively into the bedroom. When William flung open the door, Rebecca was lying on the bed. He struck her on the head several times before strangling her. Then he wrapped the body in a sheet, placed it in his pickup truck, and tried to clean the blood from the floor, walls, and bed linens with bleach. Driving onto the highway, the man simply dumped the dead body under the embankment. Miller confessed that, for no apparent reason, an overwhelming urge to take Rebecca's life arose, and he couldn't control it. He said he had regretted his actions all these years, and now had to take responsibility. After that, William Miller was arrested and extradited to Arkansas, but there he suddenly retracted his confession and claimed innocence, which could have jeopardized the entire case. Fortunately, the judge deemed the videotaped confession admissible, despite the lack of physical evidence. Miller had the opportunity to commit the crime. He knew his cousin's work schedule, and his statements matched all the details of the crime. It's worth noting that Miller initially had a way to avoid punishment. He could have simply not shown up for questioning in Oregon, refused, or left the police station at any moment. Since there was no evidence against him, William could have boarded a flight to the Philippines and left the U.S. forever to avoid prosecution. The investigators would have had to accept that they might never solve the case. But most likely, Miller had a strong desire to confess to the crime he had committed long ago. His activity in the online group, where he left numerous comments and communicated with the administrators about Rebecca's case, suggested as much. If he had stayed silent, it's likely no one would ever have found out what happened to the girl. But apparently, William was tired of battling what was weighing on him from within. Ultimately, Miller made a plea deal, and in 2022, received a 40-year prison sentence. However, the story didn't end there. Once behind bars, the man suddenly confessed to several other serious crimes. It turned out that over his lifetime, Miller had taken the lives of 5 other women whose names he didn't even know. He lured them into his car, drove them to secluded places, and then killed them. William chose his victims based on their appearance. He was drawn to young, slender, short blondes. The detectives immediately realized that this description perfectly matched Rebecca Gould's appearance. Meanwhile, the investigation into Miller continues. If you have finished watching, you are a real fan of true crime. Subscribe to the channel, turn on the bell notifications, and put the like. See you in the next video.